Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. Seth Cox joins me, as is almost always the case. He comes from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. His co-host, Justin Higdon, has been on a couple of times in the last month as we've talked draft prospects. This is the perfect time to start listening to the show if you haven't done so yet. And it's also the perfect time to, as well, to join one of the level of patrons where you can get their bonus show each week. They do a free show each week, and for those who join the lower level patron at $2 a month, you can get their bonus show. And at the generational level, for another couple bucks, you also get Justin Higdon, his co-host, his draft analysis articles as well. Seth, we've got episode 353 recorded tonight on Tuesday. We're 2.5 weeks away from the draft. We're starting to see some big hitters, some of the first-round names coming to town for their top 30 visits with the Cardinals. What do you think overall on the defensive side of the ball when it comes to this draft class?
I think it's just the strength of the class. I mean, outside of the wide receivers on offense early and for in the middle rounds, but like you look at this class, you have to salivate if you need players on the defense side of the ball, and maybe the Arizona Cardinals made decisions based on that. Now, there is, one kind of unicorn in this class that we'll discuss, and then there's a bunch of guys that look like they have long-term Pro Bowl, All-Pro potential with like low floors or high floors, I guess you want to say it, like to the point where you're like, oh, they'll just be consistent contributors in the NFL for 5, 7, 10 years. And that's just, it's not very common. And so like sitting at 23, usually it can be a little bit of a crapshoot. But in this draft on the defensive side of the ball, especially at areas of need on the edge, along the defensive line, and at corner, the Cardinals should come away with a player that not only makes an immediate impact, but could have a long-term successful career in the NFL.
And it looks like what's kind of nice about this draft class is, especially when you look at premium positions at the edge and cornerback, this is a really talented group. You can find some quality not only on day one, but on day 2 and day 3. I know Daniel Jeremiah says there's as many as there's 20 edge players that he believes could be successful in the pros, and that's we're going to talk about in the terms of the Cardinals. We're going to go through each position group. Obviously, what we'll try to do is kind of hit them in order of priority. We'll start off with the edge class, move on to cornerback, go to the defensive interior, and then close out with inside linebacker and safety. Obviously, we believe that safety and inside linebacker are positions that should be considered off the table for the first round, but that doesn't mean that they won't address those positions later on in the draft, because you can always add depth at both positions. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get started with the pass rushing, the edge defenders. For the Cardinals, that means outside linebacker. There are some elite names at the top of the draft. You've got Aiden Hutchinson out of Michigan, who might be the first overall pick. You've got Georgia's Trayvon Walker, and then you've got the kid Thibodeau out of Oregon. Those are the 3 biggest pass rushing names, and it's safe to say those probably all 3 are be gone by the first 10 selections, you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting different reads on Thibodeau at this point. We've heard everywhere from he'll be gone with the second pick to, I believe it's the Detroit Lions, to that, he's a guy that could fall, into the 8, 9, 10 realm. So, I mean, do with that information what you want. He's the guy that came into this draft class as the guy. I don't think he's done anything to lose that title, but I get the idea behind the fact that he hasn't done a whole lot to secure the title either, where he was just completely dominant all the time. Like at Thibodeau, I talked about like his higher end comp, and if you listen to the original Draft Breakdown podcast, one of the things that we try to do is give you a spectrum of outcomes, because it's unlikely that a guy, for a Kayvon Thibodeau, for instance, is when you look at his build, you look at his size, you look at how he plays, you see a guy that's a little more juiced up Chandler Jones. And so you say that and you're like, well, then this guy should be a perennial all-pro because Jones has been, a 2-3 time all-pro already. No, what that means is like he has the long arms, the bendy kind of Gumby ability that Jones had, but he tested better. So that's where you would say like a more juiced up. So that's like obviously the high end. On the low end, you get a guy, that probably is a little raw. You get a guy that doesn't live up to the hype or doesn't put in the time and the effort, that you would want to see from that guy, and you end up, maybe like a Corey Liminaire. I don't know if you guys remember that name from 2013. And I think he's still like hanging around in the NFL. I think the low end for Thibodeau really is like an Anthony Spencer type that I believe played with the Cowboys for a while. He had a pretty long career, but just never ended up like reaching the ceiling of being like an all-pro type of guy. So, Spencer played in the NFL for 8 years, had 33 sacks, had 11 sacks one season, made one Pro Bowl. Like, that's not a bad career, but, when you're talking about a first-round pick, you would like a little more. But that's what I mean when you talk about guys in the vein of, like, of the idea that they won't flop. Right? Like, yeah, with the number 2 pick, you'd probably want more than Anthony Spencer's career, but you're talking about a guy that was a productive NFL player for 8 years and made one Pro Bowl. Like, that's not a bad career. It's just you would hopefully get more from the first pick. Aiden Hutchinson, same type of guy. Like, he's a guy that could end up like a Kyle Vanden Bosch. I mean, Cardinals fans, if you've been around long enough, might remember him. A guy that
was a disappointment early on and really flourished when he went to Tennessee, but he was struggled with injuries for the first couple of years of his career.
Right. And remember, he tore his ACL his second year in Arizona or his third year, sorry. And that was back when guys didn't recover from ACL tears. Remember, that was 2003. So this was a long time ago before it was common to come back and be successful. And then he came back and had that, run in Tennessee where he's a 3-time Pro Bowler. He had 12 and a half sacks, 12 sacks, and just produced really well. If that's your low end and then your high end is, similar to like a Joey Bosa, like, okay, that's a great
yes,
that's a great outcome. So again, you're talking about, would you be satisfied drafting Kyle Vanden Bosch with the first overall pick? No, not at all. But is that a bust? No, it's just a guy that didn't live up to the hype. But still, I mean, if you get a 11-year career out of the first overall pick and you get 60 sacks, like that's a productive NFL player for a long period of time. And it's just one of those situations where that's how this kind of works. Now there's other interesting guys. You start with Trayvon Walker, right? Like, that's the first name.
Athletic freak.
Yeah, just a complete freak of nature. You look at his numbers though, and you and I kind of talked about this with off the air with a name we'll bring up in a little bit. But when you look at Walker, the one thing that doesn't jump off the page is what? His production. And so that's the question you have is, and Justin and I talked about it a little bit this week because we talked about
isn't that a Georgia thing typically?
Yeah, and that's what we talked about. We talked about the Georgia defenders, man, and so like we ranked off-ball linebackers this week, and as Cardinals fans know, there's no need for that for Cardinals fans. So I watched it with a begrudging eye this week, but in the end, you watch it and you see guys like a Nakobe Dean who's just making tackles all over the field, right? He's their stud inside linebacker, going to go in the top 60. And you watch him, and the reason why is because of a guy like Trayvon Walker. And you might say, well, that's an edge guy. Like, what is he doing? Well, what he's doing is literally allowing Nakobe Dean to make plays from sideline to sideline because he's doing his job and occupying space. And so when you're playing for Georgia and you're playing in that system, what ends up happening is that's who you are. So Walker could be a guy, when you look at his athletic comparisons, you're talking about a guy 6'5", 272, arms like vines, and that's the only way you can put it. And this is a guy that is going to comp out like a Preston Smith from a size profile, and then you look at his athletic profile, and he's closer to like a Danielle Hunter. So you're talking about Danielle Hunter from a size or from a athleticism, and then plus 20 pounds.
Oof.
I mean, that's literally. So Danielle Hunter was 6'5", 252, and Trayvon Walker was 6'5", 2, like 20 pounds heavier, and tested almost identical from just like all athletic testing. And so that's a guy, like, that's what you see. So like if your low end is a guy, like a Preston Smith type who you and I love coming out,
and he's the play. So even like what, I don't know, however many years later, he's the guy that the Packers chose over Za'Darius.
Right, because he just is a guy that's continued to produce in the NFL. And again, you look at Preston Smith's stats, and you would not be blown away. 8 sacks, 4.5, 8, 4, 12, 4, 9. Like, you're not talking about a guy that's put up, Chandler Jones like numbers, but he's never been to a Pro Bowl, but he is literally one of the most integral part of a defense. He's an athletic freak. He's a guy that you have to have on good teams, on a good defense to win. And Trayvon Walker has all of those traits, and then is just more athletic. Like that's the crazy thing about Walker. So he's kind of the wild card, because you could end up with a Myles Garrett clone, where he's just such an athletic, wonderkind that he's, you don't know how to stop him. Or he could be a guy like Preston Smith, where he's just a really, really sound defensive player that, sticks around in the NFL on really good teams for a decade. And, maybe he never makes a Pro Bowl. Maybe he never gets the recognition he deserves, but the NFL realizes how good he is.
Yeah. The next guy on the list is probably not going to be on the board for the Cardinals, but someone who is coming in for a visit, and that is Florida State's Jermaine Johnson, stud out of the Senior Bowl. He's, at least to me, of all the possibly attainable pass rushers, he seems like the home run hit, the home run pick, doesn't he? To me, he does. Like, he's the guy who's going to be great.
Yeah, and you look at him, he's a little leaner than Trayvon. So, like, again, this is what makes Walker such a freak, right? So you look at his measurables. Jermaine Johnson, 6'4" and 5'8". So let's just call it 6'5". So same height as Trayvon Walker, but he's 254 pounds. Fantastic weight. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But long arms, 34-inch arms, 82-inch wingspan. He ran a 4.58 40, which is phenomenal. He had a really good 10-yard split, but then he didn't do the rest as well as Trayvon. His vert was 32, which is not great, but his broad jump was 125 inches, so 10 feet 5 inches, which is in the 91st percentile for edge defenders. So it's something you and I were talking about off the air, right? So there's a couple metrics that matter here: change of direction, 3-cone short shuttle. if you have those Bosa numbers, and we'll get to those eventually, if you have those Bosa numbers that are freak like, but you run a 4.8, that's okay because you're so quick changing direction that guys can't stay with you. Or you have to have an explosiveness. You have to have a get off, right? And that's what Jermaine Johnson offers. He's got this length and this get off that is kind of reminiscent of like a Robert Quinn. So Quinn tested out about, I think he was 10 pounds heavier. Yeah, about 10 pounds heavier, but tested similarly. In a lot of areas, he wasn't quite as athletic. Another one that's interesting to look at for him is like a Max Crosby, right? So like Max Crosby has been a terror for
the Raiders.
The Raiders, thank you. And you look at his numbers coming out 6'4" in 7/8, 255, but he had a better vertical, but a lesser broad jump. But then like you look at his 40 and stuff. So similar type of prospect in that case, in terms of athletic testing.
And then you had the production, 11.5 sacks last year, and the dominance at the Senior Bowl, not just in practice and in the game.
So the interesting thing about Johnson, for those of you that just don't follow a lot of it, is he played at Georgia. He was part of the Georgia rotation. So he left not because he couldn't play, but because he knew that the best chance for him to get into that first round was to go somewhere else. And so look at how Georgia plays. And again, this is not a knock on Georgia. This is, I mean, their defense was literally the best defense I've seen in a decade in college football. But they're very fundamental and do your job. Very New England Patriots-esque, where you don't have a guy that's a dominant type of stat getter outside of those, off-ball linebackers getting tackles. And so a guy like Jermaine Johnson, who was used as the go-to pass rusher, so he went in for Trayvon Walker. He was the guy rotating in with Trayvon to rush the passer. All of that is, now all of a sudden Johnson is the guy at Florida State, and it just showed. I mean, he was a freak of nature. He was super productive. Like I said, his range of outcomes is, again, pretty solid when you look at it. You're looking at a guy, maybe a low end comp similar to like a I mean, it's probably too high end, but like a Harold Landry. And you could get a high end guy like a Robert Quinn when you talk about it. So like, this is a guy that's got good upside. He's a great pass rusher already. I think the biggest thing for him is going to be if he can add enough weight to become a consistent force against the run. 254 is going to be right on the edge of light. He is, you kind of look at him and he is very lean. He's built similar to Chandler in that way, but Chandler was a different animal than most guys.
And when he was playing at 255, he was playing lean. Like Chandler can play consistently. His natural playing weight is probably around 270.
Correct. And so, you look at it. So if the Cardinals, like you said, they're bringing him for one of their top 30 visits, I find that interesting based on what we're hearing. We've seen mocks where Jermaine's going 2 overall to the Detroit Lions. So, like, there's really no consensus with him. I think he's gone before 15 or by 15. I don't see the Eagles letting him get past. But, I mean, you do your due diligence and see if a guy's worth trading up for maybe. Like if he does get to like 16, 17, 18, and then you can make a move up. So, it's better to have that information than not.
So then we get to guys, so perhaps one of the most polarizing pass rushers in this class, and George Karlaftis out of Purdue, a guy who, also on the Cardinals' radar, has a top 30 visit with them. And mocked anywhere, I've seen as high as top 10. That might have been earlier in the draft process, but seems to be right in that sweet spot for the Cardinals, or a guy that slips even further. Karlaftis is an interesting one because there is not production in terms of sacks. He had 4.5 sacks for Purdue last year. But he's got the length, he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, so he's got really good testing numbers, and the motor is not a problem at all. Kind of like everything you'd look for in a pass rusher, minus the big sack production in college. And there is just, it's a love-hate. Some guys love him. You are a big fan. And I know a lot of people who are, they wouldn't touch, they're not necessarily analysts, but there is a large portion of football fans who are like, no way with Karlaftis.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. I mean, the big thing with Karlaftis, like you said, is his lack of production. So you look at his freshman year, he had 7 sacks. His sophomore year, 2 games, 2 sacks. So he only played in 2 games for Purdue during COVID, 2 sacks. Then he came back this year, 4.5 sacks in 11 games. So that's the big question mark, is this a guy that can, simply rush the passer? There's polarizing, ideas about where he fits, what he does best. He is from an athlete standpoint, he's incredible. He is a guy that's still learning to play the game, and he's, when we talk about guys, and so like this isn't a comp, but like when you watch him play, he has the same type of motor as like a Marcus Golden. And so you're talking about a guy that's a guy with the, high level ability as an edge defender with an unrelenting motor, and a guy that has shown the ability to get sacks in the past. This year, his senior year, or junior year, I guess, was not as he had hoped, but
analytically, it still passes the test because you gave me some numbers, but I saw on Twitter from Pro Football Focus he has his from the edge. Not like going inside, but from the edge itself, he had a 33% pass rushing win rate, which would be tied for the 4th highest off the edge in the last 5 seasons, just 2% behind Nick Bosa, who was off the charts productive.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, is like you look at it, like even this year when he didn't get a ton of sacks, he had 4 sacks, but then he had something like 25 hurries and 14 quarterback hits. So, and it's one of those things. So like when you look at Travon Walker and you see the lack of production, you go, okay, well that was, expected on that dominant Georgia defense. And then you look at the lack of production for Karlaftis, and it's like the opposite end of the spectrum. It's like he was the only guy that could produce on the Purdue defense. So when you look at it from those, two sides, you can maybe find your answer. We talked about this off the air. Like his range of outcomes is interesting because you got a guy that is already stout, that is already incredibly strong, and a good enough athlete where he could be like a Courtney Upshaw type player. And that may not, wet the whistle completely, but you're talking about a guy that was a very good player for the Super Bowl champion Baltimore Ravens, and then had 4 additional really good seasons with the Ravens. And then you look at like his high end, and this is, you and I laughed about it, but it is kind of the perfect comp. He could be like a Ryan Kerrigan type, right? So like it's the cheap, same school white guy comp. But you look at it,
but they tested so they look, the physical traits, the athleticism is similar, and the style as well.
Yeah, so you just look at it from that perspective. And again, if that's your range of outcomes, you're like, and you draft him at 23, obviously if he's Ryan Kerrigan, it's a home run. But if you get Courtney Upshaw, that's a double, right? Like, and that's the thing is is the Cardinals need as many doubles as they can get, just as much as they need home runs.
Other names to know who could. There's a couple of players who are mocked early second, but potentially could creep into first. And then day 2, day 3 guys to kind of know. Daniel Jeremiah says there's as many as 20 edge defenders who get good grades, who are like he believes will be successful NFL players. You get Arnold Ebiketie out of Penn State. Freakish athleticism. Could he creep in and be the pick in the 20s, even with some of his the lack of overall length, perhaps?
Yeah, so the big question with Ebiketie is, is he a guy that can be more than just a pass rusher? And to that I say, well, have you seen today's NFL? But that being said, I get where the question's coming from, right? Like, you want a guy, to your point. So his measurables, he measured with 34 and an eighth inch arms, which is,
that's
really
great.
Yeah, really good. He didn't do all the testing at the combine, but what he did was, again, where you look at Penn State and you go, what are those guys doing, right? And we're not accusing anybody of anything, but you look at those guys and their test numbers, they're freaks of nature. Ebiketie also did the thing that you love to see with prospects, in that he improved every year. So where you have concerns rightly about George Karlaftis' production over his career, Ebiketie's opposite. He started at Temple as a freshman, no sacks. As a sophomore, 2 sacks. As a junior, 4 sacks. So going in the right direction. Then he moves to Penn State. So Penn State's clearly superior. Oh, by the way, those 4 sacks were in 6 games in the COVID 2020 season. Then you go to Penn State, clearly superior, Big Ten, better than Temple and the American, and you put up 9.5 sacks. Like, that's what you should see from a guy that's improving. Now, the questions with Ebiketie are going to be, like you said, can he be a guy that is consistent every down player? And so that's the thing, is like, if you're taking Ebiketie, you're not so let's just use the Cardinals, because that's who we are talking about, obviously. When you look at it this season, if Devin Kennard's your base, and then you bring Kennard off and you have Golden, Watt, Allen, and Ebiketie as your pass rushers, you're okay with that. The expectation would be then in year 2 that Ebiketie would be able to take over for Devon Kennard, right? Like, he'd be able to be an every down player for Kennard. That's the big thing. That's the big question. So if you use the pick at 23, if you get a pass rusher only in year 1, it's not a big problem, but it would be a big problem if in year 3 he's still a pass rusher only, right?
Yeah.
So that's Ebiketie. Then you've got, unfortunately, a guy that would have been a great fit here that got hurt, David Ajabo.
Oh, Ajabo. Yeah.
And so your heart breaks for that kid. He's going to end up probably in a better spot, let's be honest. Like, instead of going in the top 15 or top, potentially higher, he's going to end up going a little bit lower now and end up hopefully in a better spot. Low end type of guy, you're looking at a guy similar to, like, or maybe not a low end, but it's like a Whitney Merciless type, which would be a great type of career for him. I think Merciless went in the 2nd round too, if I remember correctly. So, you're talking about a guy with pass rush skills. You just have to understand that you're probably not going to see him at all in 2022. So can the Cardinals do that? I don't know, man. Let's just be honest. They've kind of done it not on purpose the last couple of seasons. But I think if you just go in with that plan, it probably would rub some the wrong way. But when you look at it, 6'4", 250, he's lean, but he's a strong guy. He's got really good movement and explosiveness, and he's still learning how to play the position. That's what makes him so enticing, right? Like that's what makes him a guy that you look at and you're like, this is a guy that I think I can win with. My thing with injured guys, man. It's hard for me to take him at 23, almost to the point where if he was there at 55 and you didn't address the edge position in round one, I can get on board with it, but I don't know if you can do it in the first round.
Right, that makes sense. It makes sense. Couple of names on kind of day two-ish. There's some other ones, and Boye Mafe from Minnesota is probably going to be out of reach for the Cardinals in the first.
He's probably like a trade down target. So if you move down into the, say like Kansas City wants to give you one of their first and one of their seconds or thirds. I don't know what the draft chart would look like. And you move down to, I think it's 30. Mafe is a guy that could make sense there. Right.
And other names as well. You've got the kid out of Houston, Logan Hall. You've got Nick Bonito, Oklahoma, and Cameron Thomas out of San Diego State. Some notable day two names as well.
Yeah, so Hall and Thomas, I'm going to talk about Thomas on our podcast next week, but Thomas and Hall are guys that really look to me like they could be 34 defensive ends. So maybe rotational guys with Zach Allen and J.J. Watt. Now, people might say the Cardinals don't need that, but let's just look back last year. Okay, having a guy in case Watt gets injured would be huge, right?
Yeah, well, and you look at guys like Watt and Zach Allen, they also have some versatility to play edge. Allen's played a little off the edge. Watt, we know in his career, has bounced between inside and outside his entire career before last year.
Yeah, and so then you mentioned Nick Bonito, the Oklahoma. He's the guy, if he was there at 55 and you don't take a Karlaftis in round one or Ebiketie in round one, Bonito I would draft without even thinking twice. Bonito build is like a bigger version of Hassan Reddick. His game is similar with a more refined pass rush skill already. I'm actually surprised he's not getting more run in the end of the first round. We saw like Peyton Turner. I don't know if you remember that name, but end up in the first round last year from Houston. And I think Benito's a better prospect already. A couple names for round three to think about that are interesting. The first one's Sam Williams out of Ole Miss. Again, a freak athlete. Williams comes with some off-field baggage that got cleared. So again, that's all Jess and I can talk about is that he is not guilty of whatever he was accused of doing. That being said, 6'3", just under 6'4", 260. He ran a 4.46 40. And then he had a 123-inch broad jump. So you're talking about a guy with some absolute get off and juice. If the background checks out, you look at him and you see a guy, similar that can come in and probably be a day one pass rush impact type of guy. I don't know if he's ever going to become physical enough to be a every down player, but if you get a guy that can get you 8 sacks a season as a rotational guy and then adjust from there, I think you're excited about that. So those are the names I like coming out. There's some interesting guys, in other spots, but we could do a whole show on the edge.
Right. I do want to mention one name as a guy. I don't think he will creep into day 3, but since the Cardinals have 5 picks in the 6th and 7th rounds, and if you've listened to the show long enough, Seth and I view the 6th and 7th rounds as almost throwaway picks. They're guys that you don't want to compete in the undrafted market, in my opinion, unless you have him graded so much higher. They're just guys that you bet on athleticism, and there's a guy who is probably going to be a priority free agent. We'll see if he ends up landing here. They brought in defensive end Daniel Hardy out of Montana State. Yeah, Montana State. But he played 1 year of high school football. He moved to the edge for the first time this past season and completely dominated his league. 16.5 sacks, 24.5 tackles for loss. He's built like a slightly longer Hassan Reddick, but his athletic comps are incredible. 4.57 40, 6.78 3-cone. That's unheard of for some guy his size. His 40-inch vertical leap, 10 foot 7, so 127-inch broad jump. And on top of that, he's got 34-inch arms to go on that 6'2" frame. So he's lean at 235 like Reddick, but, of the guys that you could go for an undrafted guy, completely dominant, playing a new position at a smaller school with crazy, crazy athleticism. That's just a name I want to throw out there because I ran across him as one of their top 30 visits.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you're talking about with those, picks, especially the last two in the 7th round. Like, you take a guy with those physical traits and you just see if it works out. And if it doesn't, it's a 7th round pick.
Right, 7th round picks, people. 7th round picks. But anyway, coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We'll move on and hopefully move a little bit faster through the next premium position, and that's at cornerback. Another position of concern for the Cardinals. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to talk about the cornerbacks. It is a talented cornerback group. Let's not spend too much time about the top guys. So Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley, elite. They're not going to be off on the board. You can even argue, you can even go that it trending a player that the Cardinals actually, we know, have nice interest in. It's a Washington defensive back in Trent McDuffie. We've seen mock drafts of it going as late as the Cardinals. I've also seen him going top 10 in some mock drafts. So let's kind of start with the cornerbacks with McDuffie. So there's McDuffie out of Washington. You've got Booth out of Clemson. You've got Kyer Elam out of Florida. And I'm going to throw Kyler Gordon, the other Washington DB, in there. Of those four guys, who's a possibility for the Cardinals at 23?
So the first guy I'll talk about is Kyer Elam. If you listen to the show that we dropped today, so we're recording on a Tuesday, both Kyle talked a lot about Kyer Elam and that he's going to be his number 3 corner in the class. He loves Elam. He loves his game.
Marco Wilson's teammate a year ago.
And a guy with more juice than Marco, which seems hard to believe.
Right?
But, I mean, size-wise, 6'1.5", 190 pounds. This dude's got size. He's got decent length, 76.5-inch wingspan. But you look at it, 4.39 40. He didn't do jumps or anything like that. He's a guy, when you look at it, he's got similar traits to a guy. Oh man, where did my notes go? Sorry, Justin and I were just talking about him the other day too, where you look at him. Oh, sorry, Antrell Roll. So, and you look at him and you're like, okay, this is a dude. Again, when we talk about kind of fail-proof, you look at a guy that might be too physical, to play corner in the NFL. That's his knock, is that he's grabby, that he's grabbing too much, and
some of the best cornerbacks that we've seen in the NFL were grabby cornerbacks. They just had to, one, Jalen Ramsey, Patrick Peterson in his heyday. Those have all been very, very handsy cornerbacks that, one, the reputation allowed them to do so, and two, they got better at it.
Well, and that's just it. Like, I mean, obviously Cardinals fans remember the good times with Patrick Peterson as well as the end and the bad times. But there was that time at the beginning where he was a flag machine. And I'm not comparing Elam to Patrick Peterson, but I'm saying the style where he was too grabby and things like that. And then the Antrell Roll comp comes in when you look at it from an athleticism standpoint and then size. He's a little leaner than Antrell was. I believe Antrell was like 201 when he came out. Elam measured in at 192, but Antrell became a Pro Bowl safety. So
the Cardinals tried to make him a perimeter guy, and that didn't work because the way he was used in college was as a playmaker all over the field. And when you made him a playmaker, you put him in the slot, you put him in the safety, you put him in the box. He was able to make plays all over the place. But as a strictly perimeter guy, Roll, well, he's still one of the players I don't love from in my Cardinals fandom. I don't love him, but he did become a very, very good player.
So one of the craziest things about Elam, though, is that his strength and what he does well is exactly what Vance likes to do, right? He likes to be able to play press man, and then he likes to be able to play press zone, so he can press guys, he can use his physicality, and then drop into zone coverages and really kind of change the look that people are getting. You've got a bunch of different names you can go with him, like I said, but like you've got a guy that traits wise and game wise looks like a guy that can play in the NFL and be successful. One of the names that we've seen is like a Trayvon Mullen type, and he was a second round pick a couple of years ago. I think he's got a little more juice than Trayvon had, who was a mid 4.4 guy, but he's similar type of player, like I said. And then, like I said, you got the Antrell Roll. Here's the thing, man. Like you look at the corners in this class, and then the next guy that we'll talk about, being Andrew Booth. You're not getting locked. You're not going to be like, oh man, we got a lockdown guy right here. Like you're going to have a guy that's got some issues. And so like his comps are going to come out and people are going to be like, well, that's not a corner I want on my team. But the reality is that like a Trayvon Mullen or like, some of the comps for Andrew Booth are like, Jalen Johnson or who's the guy that kind of sucked for Tennessee this year? With a funny name.
Janoris. Formerly Janoris, now Jackrabbit Jenkins.
Right.
The Cardinals fans know him well from all of his interceptions with the Rams.
Right. And so, like, people look at that and they're like, oh, he stinks. And it's like,
decade-long ball hawk.
Right. A guy that's been in the NFL for 10 years and played corner one for a lot of competitive teams doesn't stink. It's just, he may not be a guy that ends up being a complete lockdown corner.
He's just not a Hall of Famer. He's really good.
Right. And so that's the thing. So like if these are the guys you get where you've got, and so now we're talking about Andrew Booth where you get him, in that 23 range, and you end up with a guy like a Jalen Johnson, who's a good NFL player, or a Jackrabbit Jenkins. Like that's a good, solid pickup. Yes, I know everybody wants to have the All Pro, and I 100% agree with that. It would be fantastic to get the All Pro.
But those are the guys. That's Sauce and that's Stingley, potentially.
Right. Exactly. So, and it doesn't preclude those guys. It's just those are their closest physical and stylistic comps when you look at it. Kyler's an interesting one for me, man, because we talked about it a little bit. Like he's more of a chess piece to me than he is a guy that you're just like, hey, you're a lockdown corner.
Interesting. So, especially because you've got Trent McDuffie, you've got Kyler Gordon. Both Washington guys, and we know the Cardinals like Washington DBs. Budda Baker, Byron Murphy, even Zeke Turner was a Washington DB that turned into a special teams ace and a linebacker. So for our listeners, if we're going to talk Byron Murphy as our comp, what do we see in both Kyler Gordon and Trent McDuffie, at least compared to Byron Murphy?
So when you look at it, you've got a guy that is great in zone coverage, right? You got a guy that likes to be able to see where he's at and has his eyes to the ball and then be able to click and close pretty quickly. That's a good thing for him. His man stuff is, not as great. We talked a little bit about Kyrie Lum's like wingspan 6'76". Gordon's is 74 3/4, right? So a little shorter. He's a 4.52 guy, so he's not quite the athlete, that Elam is. And he doesn't have the length of like a Booth. So like those are things that stick out. But what you do see with these guys and what makes them so interesting, man, is that they're super, super aggressive and they're super physical guys. And those are big things for corners. I'm not sure how well they fit exactly in terms of like what their usage could be, but they're guys, and they're not as athletic, so I don't want this to be like the comp, but like they're guys like JC Horn was coming out last year. You remember that was just like a very physical type of guy. So, I think he's a guy, Gordon, that if you get him, I think he's going to be good. I just don't know, like if you put him out on the boundary, so the outside corner position, that's going to be what he does best.
Anything about McDuffie? I know he's largely viewed as the more complete guy over a guy like Gordon. Smooth, obviously doesn't have all the traits, not quite long enough, but athletic enough, physical enough, and technically sound.
Yeah, McDuffie's interesting, man, because there's a lot of guys that are scared off by a couple things. One, 5'10", baby arms, under 30-inch arms, 72 3/8 wingspan, 4'4", 40 was, technically 4'4", 40 wasn't bad. He kind of gives me Darqueze Dennard vibes, and so Dennard went in that range of late first round to the Bengals, has had a good career. I said the other day he kind of comps out really well to like a Kareem Jackson, again a guy that's still in the NFL. So we're talking about a guy that's been in the NFL 13 years. I think he's got one Pro Bowl under his belt, so people get upset with that. You're like, oh, that's not a good enough comp. He's Jair Alexander. It's like, well, if he was Jair Alexander, then I think we would have seen more on-ball production from him at Washington. That's the big thing that I think is missing from his game. Alexander was a 4.38 guy. He had an incredible short shuttle as well. So you look at it, I think McDuffie's going to have a good career. I've said all along, he is the guy that I think is going to end up getting moved to safety, and that's not a shot at him in any means whatsoever. But his game kind of reminds me of the guy that just signed and that was with Tampa, Jordan Whitehead. So like his game's kind of like Jordan Whitehead. So it'll be interesting to see where he fits in. I think he's going to go top 15. I wouldn't take him at 15. I don't know if I'd take him at 23, to be frank with you. I would rather have a guy like Khair Alam. Booth scares me because of the injuries, man. Like that's like it was his first year playing full time and he couldn't even stay healthy and he hasn't been able to test or do anything because of the core body injury. Now it's just a sports hernia, but like that always worries me. Run through some quick guys on round 2. Roger McCreary, like a guy.
Your guy Walter Mitchell on your site, big fan. Compared to Aeneas Williams.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Again, I
wouldn't do that. No, don't compare guys to Hall of Famers. But
yeah, I try to give more of a range of outcomes. Again, you're talking about a guy athletically similar to like a Darqueze Dennard. who's again had a very good career. McCreary is physical, like straight up physical. He likes to bully people, but he's got really short arms, which is concerning. He's also a little bit older. Um, you know, I think he's going to end up being a really good slot guy in the NFL. So I'm not sure if that's the fit they're looking for, but who knows? That's in round two. Another guy that's getting some round two buzz is a Martin Emerson out of Mississippi State. Emerson is one of the big ones, right? So like you've got small guys and then you've got big guys. Emerson's one of the big guys in this class. I think he's 6'2". They list him at, yeah, so 6'2", 200 pounds, so a good size, 4'5", 40. When you look at it, he's a guy that is another press zone guy. He got to get better. He's not, he only was a 4'5" guy at 6'2", so that fluidity is a little lacking there. I'm not a big Emerson guy. I know others that are. He's an interesting one. In the end, coming out of this, because he's one of the few guys with size in this class.
Tariq Woolen, super intriguing with the played at UTSA, so barely competition there. The length at 6'4", the speed is out of this world, and a guy I kind of liked watching. Look, he was not. It was opposite Sauce Gardner. That's Kobe Bryant, another guy out of Cincinnati.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to see guys like that, right? Like, so Kobe was a guy that got most of the work, and he put up good numbers. You mentioned Woolen. I think the only thing that is going to scare guys away is that he's only been doing it for like 3 seasons, so people are going to get super stressed out about that again, right? Brandon Williams flashback all over again. But yeah, like, he's an interesting guy. Kobe's an interesting guy. I think he's probably more of a late day 3 guy. Another name to think about in round 3, sorry, not day 3, round 3, Cam Taylor Brett out of Nebraska, 6 foot, 200 pounds, ran a 4.38 40. He's been the discussion of our group text that we do a lot of work in with the scouting groups, and he's a guy that a lot of people really like, comping out to like a Kendall Fuller type of guy, man, which is super intriguing if you like that. And then my personal favorite, and a guy that I can't vouch for because he hasn't done anything yet, and he has terrible measurables, and he's a little bit on the older side, but I love his tape. I love the way he plays, and if the Cardinals drafted him at 87, you would never hear me say a bad word about it. Is Marcus Jones out of Houston? When I say small,
5'8", 185, dude.
Yeah, he is.
This is like, what's his name? God, played for the Cardinals. Money Mike.
Mike Adams.
Adams, yes.
Yeah, and so Jones is a incredibly productive guy. He is super physical, and then he is literally a game changer in the return game, like a guy that will 100% be a Pro Bowl, potential all-pro return man as well. He could be the slot guy. The problem is now the Cardinals are playing in, so like if Tyler Lockett were the slot guy for the 3 other teams, he'd be a perfect fit. The problem is he's going to go up against the 6'3" Cooper Kupp, the 6'2", 225-pound Deebo Samuel. Now, I know there's not anybody physically that can deal with those guys, but do you really want to put a guy that's 5'8" and 185 pounds on him? It really 100% is, but like, dude, if you put on the film and just watch him, you would not know he's 5'8". Like that dude is a dog. He works his ass off consistently, and he is one of the guys, like, the attitude that this defense is missing sometimes, that edge, that dog mentality, he would bring that 100%. But I would honestly understand him not even being like draftable for some teams at 5'7" or 5'8".
So, Arizona State fans out there, Chase Lucas was a super intriguing name early on. What does he look like in terms of the scouting? Because he has some physical traits. He's not overly athletic, but there were some good things that he did in college.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, he didn't test poorly. You look at his vert and his broad jump; they were phenomenal. He had a 39-inch vertical, 128-inch broad. Really, really solid numbers, man. He came in honestly taller than I expected. I didn't remember him being 6 feet tall.
Yeah, it's Jack Jones that's on the smaller side.
Okay. And so, his jumps make him more intriguing. The 4.48 40 is not bad. Wingspan's fine, 74.5 inches. The tape is, kind of what's concerning with Lucas. He's not a guy that played as productive as you would hope with the chances he got. He's lean at what is he, 185? So 6 feet, 185. These other guys we're talking about, like, I know it's only like 11 pounds, but he's a lean at 185. That's like the 8th percentile in terms of that. And so when you look at Lucas, he's a guy that you're probably looking at late 5th into the 6th type of round guy. He's got some interesting guys that he comps out to from athleticism, easier said than done, standpoint, that had good NFL careers. But again, you're talking about a guy that you're looking at later in the draft, not necessarily early in the draft. One of the names that comes up is like a Richard Marshall. He was in Fresno State. Now, he was drafted way earlier, but he had a nice career, with Carolina, and he played for the Cardinals. I don't know if you remember that, in 2011. So a guy like Marshall, if he could have a similar career to him, I think he would be a guy that wouldn't be a bad ad with one of those 6th round picks like we talked about. The big things are he's just not very physical, and in that thin frame, I don't know if he can get any more size on him. But he's got good footwork, and we've seen him at Arizona. He's not a guy that kills you. I just don't know if he's a guy that is going to ever be more than like your 4th corner.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to the defensive interior. Well, there's some really big names at the top. Maybe some people don't know about later. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move to the defensive interior. The two biggest names are amazing. Jordan Davis, coming out of Georgia, and then also coming out of Georgia, Devontae Wyatt. You and Justin talked about Jordan Davis, 340 pounds, insane, like literally no real comp for him. You have to comp him to a grizzly bear. 4'7", 840 at 340 pounds, insane broad jump, insane vertical, just a freak of nature. And Devontae Wyatt not far behind. I get the feeling if one of those two players is available, it would be really, really hard for Steve Keim to say no to.
So, I mean, a little like inside information, if you would, like the only thing I've heard is that Jordan Davis is the top player on their board. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Because we know, let's look at the history over the last 5-6 years. Drafted Kim Dichie. They were talking uber athletic guys. He coveted and salivated over Quinnen Williams in 2019. Same thing with Derek Brown in 2020.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at it, Davis is, like we said, a unicorn. Like, he is a true potential freak of nature. We've never seen anybody his size as athletic as he is. It's not just the size, 6'6" and 3/8. It's the 340 pounds that makes him so unique. Running a sub 4.840, the 32-inch vertical. You may not think that's a lot, but
he's 340 pounds,
right? And then the 123-inch broad jump is basically unheard of. You're talking about a guy that did a standing broad jump of 10 feet, 3 inches. Yeah, dude, it's just, he's an insane prospect. We've never seen anything like him before. You gotta go back in time. I've said before, like, his high end production, or his like high end is you can't even comp him, but like Haloti Ngata, right? So Ngata, I don't know if he's in the Hall of Fame, but man, he had a hell of a career. So that's your high end, projection for him. So 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All Pro. Like, okay, I'll take that. And then, your low end would be like a John Henderson back in the day. I don't, and Henderson might have even been an All Pro. So, I mean, that may be a slightly unfair comp. No, yeah. So Henderson was a 2-time Pro Bowler, but yeah, so that's about right. 6'6", 335. So, I don't see Davis being there, man. I just don't.
No way. It just can't be.
It would be the best fortune for the Cardinals they've had since being able to draft Kyler Murray. I mean, it really would. Next guy you talked about is Devontae Wyatt, and this is where the discussion comes, right? You look at Devontae Wyatt, 6'3", 307 pounds. When you look at Quinnen Williams, who went third overall in that draft, he was 6'3", 303. Wyatt had a 4.77 40. Williams had a 4.8 340. Wyatt had a 29-inch vertical. Williams had a 30-inch. Wyatt had a 111-inch broad jump. Williams had a 112-inch broad jump. Like, they're literally almost the same guy. It's crazy. And then you look at production-wise, that's where the questions are going to come from. Production, just, as we've talked about before, in the fourth year, if that's the first time you have big production, what took so long? I tried to dig into the arrest as much as possible. So he has one off-field incident. The charges were dropped. But there was, an off-field incident that you have to kind of look into. But again, you're talking about a guy that feels safe, and I know people don't like that, but when you're talking about, a range of outcomes where you can be a guy that's, maybe like a Kawan Short, who was I think had a couple Pro Bowl seasons with the Carolina Panthers, and then your low end, is a guy that maybe, like I'm trying to think here who would be a good low end for Devontae. But yeah, when you look at it, you've got a guy that, I don't want to say, again, it's foolproof. He's a little on the older side, which is always concerning. And then, he's a little, and then he didn't have a ton of production. But like, when you're looking at guys like, like a Sharif Floyd, where he was a decent player for a good amount of years before the knee injury really kept up or took him down. Those are a good range of outcomes.
Other guys worth taking up. Here's some other names that are kind of out there. Travis Jones. You got DeMarvin Leal out of Texas A&M. Perion Winfrey. Who are some other interior defenders that are worth their snuff? Because I know that, the Cardinals could go. You could go with another nose tackle. You could go with more of a Zach Allen, J.J. Watt type. You could go with what they were looking to get out of Jordan Phillips. Who else is out there worth taking a look at?
So if you're looking at interior defensive linemen, I mean, Travis Jones, I don't think he'll be there at 55, so maybe he's a guy you trade back and you grab. He's got like a range of outcomes of like Marcel Darius to like Eddie Goldman. So again, a fairly safe prospect. I know Cardinals fans still kind of get scared of UConn defenders in the second round, but he's a true nose tackle. He's a guy that's going to be a nose tackle in the league. And he's put up freaky numbers, and we'd be talking a lot more about him if he wasn't in the same class as the unicorn. But he was 6'4" and 3/8, 325 pounds. He ran a 4.92 40, man. That's like really good. And then he had 110 broad, which is phenomenal for his size. That's 80th percentile. And Jordan Davis beat him by 13 inches, being 2 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier. Like, again, you can't really even talk about it, but like if you need a nose, Jones is the guy. Another guy, if we're talking strictly as like a nose guy, that would be a little later in the draft, Noah Ellis out of Idaho. He's 6'4" and 367, but he moves like a nose tackle. So he ran a 5'6", 640. But again, 367, you're not really expecting him. I mean, if he ran a sub 5'2", talking about him, he's the guy you could probably get in that fourth round or in that sixth round area. But there's really no comparisons to him because he is so big and you just don't see that very often. Then there's the guys you mentioned. I mean, there's a guy, DeMarvin Leal. He would be kind of a fit with Watt and Allen. 6'4", 290. He didn't really put up the numbers everybody was expecting, but I think he can be a guy that can be a productive 3-4 end. I'm not sure where he falls. That's the thing, is like the team see him being able to be like a 34 defensive end, or is he a guy that teams look at and they'll see a guy that could be an interior pass rusher. He's got some similarities in size to like a Darnell Dockett, but I don't think he's and he tested similarly. I don't think he has that same dog in him. To me, he's more similar to like a guy like I'm trying to think of a good one recently, but that's the question with him. Can he be a guy that plays on that edge, or as a 34 defensive end? Perrion Winfrey's another interesting guy. When you talk about, again, kind of those edge guys, 6'4", 292. He ran a 4.89 40. We don't have the rest of the testing numbers yet. And I believe he won the Senior Bowl MVP, did he not? Or defensive MVP?
I don't recall.
I believe he did it. I could be wrong about that. I apologize if I am. But yeah, he could be a guy that is a really impressive kind of under tackle in the same realm as JJ Watt in his usage. So again, if you're going to draft him, you have to understand that he's not going to start over JJ Watt. Obviously not, but he could be a guy that gives you some relief and protection in case Watt goes down or becomes injured anyway. And then from there, it's kind of a crapshoot on what you like. There's guys like the Bama prospect. How do you pronounce his name? Fedarian
Mathis.
Yeah, Mathis. 6'4", 312 pounds. So he's kind of one of those. He's kind of one of those Bama guys, right? Like he fits in. He not a freak of nature. he had a decent broad jump at 109, but like none of his other stuff is like off the charts outside of just being a big guy. He could be similar to like an Ashawn Robinson type. He's not going to be a guy that's that is a pass rusher consistently, but he's a guy that can come in and play again a little bit on the older side. So that's always he's going to be 24 this year. You look at like a Matthew Butler out of Tennessee, or Neil Farrell out of LSU. You've got different type of guys that you can look at. Farrell, but you're talking about guys that I don't know if you would take at 87. So that's the hard thing. It's like you're getting out of the range of being able to draft guys. The one name I'll mention, and we kind of talked about it earlier, was Logan Hall, right? And so Hall is listed by a lot of places as an edge. I really do think with Logan Hall, if you put some meat on him, he measured in at 6'6" and 1/8 and 283 pounds. He kind of reminds you of like a little bit of Calais Campbell. And remember, Calais got 2 full seasons before he had to take over and become the guy. So if you can add some weight to him and continue for him to grow, I think you're in a good spot. I just, this defensive line class has some talent, but you got to take him 55 and above.
Let's move on to the next group. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to start talking about a position that we kind of don't like talking about, but it's worth looking at later on in the draft, and that would be at inside linebacker. That's coming up next at Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Inside linebacker is intriguing. It feels like doesn't it feel like it would be a waste? Obviously, first round waste. But even on day 2, doesn't it feel like it might be a waste to use even a day 2 pick on an inside backer?
It really does, unless they're planning on transitioning Isaiah Simmons or Zayvon Collins into an edge playing role, or they're moving to a 4-3 defense. Those are the only ways. Or even like a 3-3 defense where you're having 3 guys, 3 linebackers on at a time. So we'll run it down real quick. Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean, Christian Harris, Quay Walker, and Leo Chanel, probably all guys that you're not going to even think about because they're probably all going to go before 55 anyways. So let's talk about guys after 50, 55 and after. Chad Muma out of Wyoming is an interesting one. He's a big dude, runs well, had a good Senior Bowl. 6'3", 240 pounds, 4'6'3", but he had a 40-inch vertical and 129-inch broad. So good explosiveness. When you look at it from that perspective, you see a guy that could, potentially be a guy that turns and runs with guys, good length to do so. The next guy would be like a Troy Anderson out of Montana State. We talked about a Montana State player earlier, correct? That Montana State, the edge rusher.
Yeah, Daniel Hardy.
Yeah. So his
Anderson is one that is well known among
right. So yeah, 6'3.5", 243, ran a 4.42 40, which is really good if you're not familiar with that. So I mean, when you look at it, he's a guy that, again, if you need some more athleticism at linebacker, he could fit. But again, are we really talking about him? So then you get into the ones further down. Darian Beavers out of Cincy, so a guy that could be in play in the 87 range. And again, this is if they were to do that. I'm not saying they will, but might as well cover our bases. Test similarly to a Fred Warner coming out of BYU. Obviously, we all saw how that worked out for San Francisco. I don't think that'd be a bad thing for the Cardinals. They could still use that type of guy. From there, you look at it, you've got, You've got like JoJo Doman, who's more of a coverage guy out of Nebraska. You've got DeMarco Jackson, um, out of Appalachian State, same type of thing. Malcolm Rodriguez is a guy similar to like a Blake Martinez or who's the other guy? Nick Kwiatkowski, was that the guy?
Yeah, yeah.
From a couple years ago. So like guys like that. All of those guys, are probably going to go on day 3. So if the Cardinals were to add a pick later in the draft, those are guys that would be in play for that area right there.
Something to note about some of those later prospects is a kind of reminder of Vance Joseph and his scheme. Now, while he has used Zeke Turner a little bit, he's really not a defensive chess piece. Vance Joseph likes big linebackers, 6'2", 6'3", 230 pounds or more. And a lot of the day 3 guys, they tend to be the smaller, faster ones.
Right.
Couple of names worth paying attention to that kind of fit that bill. If you remember when the Cardinals drafted Evan Weaver, you've got, I think it's Aaron Hansford out of Texas, one of the Texas, I think Texas A&M. Colorado's Nate Landman. Also, I think those kind of fill that sort of mold of style of player. It's just Weaver didn't. He proved he could be athletic enough, but couldn't. Like, whether it was the mental side of things or just never getting enough reps because of a pandemic year, and then the next year never got enough reps to show that he could be the physical force that he was at Cal.
Right, and then you look at it like you said, you've another guy that kind of fits that mold. It's like a Jack Sanborn out of Wisconsin, right? So a bunch of guys that fit in that 6th round type of range. Landman's an interesting one, like you said, as well. So, Landman, 6'3", 235. He only ran a 4.8 640, but he had a 36.5-inch vert, 119 broad. So explosiveness, but maybe not the twitchiness. And he suffered an Achilles tear, Landman did, in 2020. So I do wonder how much he was completely healthy. And I know it's 2 years, or it's been.
He was in 2019. He was so good, but he came back to play in 2021, which was helpful for him. But he's someone who will go late 7th round, maybe undrafted.
Right. And so all those guys, kind of fit, like you said, with what they are looking for in those picks. The big thing you look at with these guys, and the reason like why a guy like who was it that I was talking about? I think it was Doman or and he may go earlier, man. Like the reason like Doman is so interesting is because he's a guy that's played a lot of special teams already. So, when you look at it from that perspective, a guy that already knows that he's going to have to earn those spot and stuff like that. So there's a lot of guys that come in and they don't have that ability. And that's so important for day 3 linebackers.
Let's move on to the last position group. Coming on next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. We'll move to the back end of the defense to safety. Who is there worth looking at for the Cardinals? That's coming on next on Rise Up C-Red. They're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Is it me, or does it feel like as well, same type of thing, that safety would feel like almost a waste before day 3? And which is, I mean, you've got love Boda Baker. They love Jalen Thompson. He's probably going to get a contract extension, which means you don't necessarily want to have a guy who's potentially expected to be a starter. But at the same time, can you ever have enough good players?
No, and that's the thing you look at. So you look at, obviously we'll get the names out of the way quick. Kyle Hamilton, Jaquan Brisker, Dax Hill, Nick Cross, Lewis Seen, probably not going to be on there. So then you look at guys like a Brian Cook out of Cincy, right? So that's the first guy that jumps out at you, 6'1", 210, big dude. And you say, okay, what does he do? Can he cover? And then you look at it and you're like, okay, probably not his best trait. He's not bad at it, but it's not he's more of a in the box guy at 6'1", 210, right? So then you go, okay, what about like a Jalen Petrie? Petrie's a really intriguing prospect, 6 foot, 197 pounds. Uh, Ran the shuttles, didn't run the vert, but he showed he has some ability, and he plays a similar position to what the Rams did with Jalen Ramsey this year, and that's play that star position. Now, that's the thing. So that's a little corner safety hybrid. Petrie's got the size for it. He's got the movement ability. His 3 cone at 6'7" 4" was really, really good. Um, he's got a little bit shorter arms. So that's what the question becomes. Is he a guy, if you put him at corner, that he can compete? Um, he has played it a little bit in the in college, so that's why you look at him and you say, okay, maybe he could be an option, because he does have some coverage ability. And then you get into the round three guys, right? So it starts with, all right, are you going to play three safeties consistently? Now, that wasn't Vance that did that, but there are some guys that maybe they would make you want to. One of the guys is like a Kirby Joseph. So we know that like Jalen and Buddha can play in the slot a little bit. And so if you bring in like a Joseph, um, he's a guy that can play like a true middle field safety. The crazy thing about Joseph is that he's 6'1", 203, but he has a 80-inch wingspan, and so he's got like vines for arms, and it's just something that you don't really see very often. Um, we've seen guys with his size and skill set that fit what the Cardinals may want to do, but who knows. Next, at the safety position again, you're talking about now. I guess I can throw in the kid out of Oregon, Verone McKinley. Another kind of free safety type, 5'11", 194. Um, Similar to like a Jordan Whitehead out of that we talked about earlier. Um, it's just going to be length. Is he a guy that can cover enough? He's got shorter arms, so that's those are like all the guys on day two. Then you get to day three, and what is day three about safeties? Well, we see them take one every year, right? And so then it becomes about athleticism. Um, we kind of glossed over that because there were so many high end corners. So I'll throw some of those guys in here as well, real quick. Uh, First one would be like a Zion McCollum out of Sam Houston State. He put up ridiculous numbers at the combine. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go in round four, just because he is a kind of a unicorn at 6'2", 200 pounds. He ran a 4.33 40, had a 40-inch vertical, 132-inch broad, but then he had a 6.48 3 cone, which is like unheard of. Like his testing numbers are out of this world. You just don't see guys his size run like that. He has short arms though for his size, which is odd too. And so like, but he's an impact special teams guy. He's been a guy that's done it already a long time. Another Baylor guy to know about was Kalen Barnes. So again, when you're talking about guys, because right now they just have 2 6 and 2 7th-round picks. When you're looking at Barnes and you say, okay, 6 feet, about 190 pounds, 4.23 40. All right,
Oh,
so he's a guy that you can say, hey, maybe we grab him. He's a gunner early on, and maybe we work with him on some other things. Worst case scenario, he's your next Justin Bethel, right? Like that's kind of what you look for in him. So again, athletic traits that create opportunities, and we've got some of those guys, in the same vein, with the safeties, this year. I think it was who was the kid that I cannot find now, but yeah. So that's what you're looking for on day three with the safeties, right? Like you need to find guys that fit into the end of the round, that showed, I believe it was it Bubba Bolden that tested really well? I can't remember. I'm trying to find the notes I had, but yeah, Bubba Bolden. So 6'3", 205, but he ran a 4.47. He was supposed to be a guy that was like, I think he was a 5-star recruit coming out. But like, again, fantastic special teams guy when he was at USC. And then at Miami, when they played Clemson, he blocked 2 field goals. Like, you're talking about a guy that like offers you something in the 6th or 7th round at a position that you typically draft that late. So, you know, there's a lot of guys. We're not going to be able to mention them all, but like, those are some names just to know.
All right, and with that will wrap up this edition, episode 353 of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Unless things change, we're probably not going to have a show next week. The draft is not next week, and my daughter's getting married, so that's going to be a crazy week. So
congratulations to Jess.
Yes, I'm gaining a son-in-law, which I'm very, very pleased about. But we will be back the week of the draft. We'll be back the week of the draft to do our yearly mock draft, where we both mock the first round and see if, first of all, if we can nail the Cardinals pick, and 2, how many picks can we get right. We've had a couple of years where they've been good, and some that have been absolutely atrocious. But hey, that's what you go. So with that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is Rise of C-Red podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again, at minimum, in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, be Red C-Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.
Roll!